The knife feels like an extension of my soul, not in the way it used to, not as a weapon of ambition, a razor-sharp tool to conquer and impress. Here, in the quiet, salt-laced air of my tiny kitchen, it's a tool of peace. The blade glides through the flesh of a scallop, just pulled from the bay this morning. Its edge so keen it separates the cells without bruising them. The sound is a faint, satisfying chick. It's a sound of respect. That's the word, respect. It's what I lost, and what I had to travel 400 miles and through the 7 circles of my own personal hell to find again. A scent memory hits me, as they often do. It's not the clean, briny smell of the sea in this room. It's the smell of truffle oil, the cheap kind, and burnt garlic. It's the smell of the service alley behind Aurelia, the restaurant in Philadelphia that was my entire world. I'm standing there, my chef's whites, once a source of immense pride, feeling like a costume. My hands are shaking, not from fatigue after a 16-hour service, but from a rage so pure and so cold, it feels like it's turning my blood to ice. In my hand is my phone. The screen is lit up with a press release from a food blogger I know. Chef Julien Dubois announces audacious reinvention, Aurelia to close, reborn as Hearth. Hearth. The name is a punch to the gut, stealing the air from my lungs. It's a secret word, a sacred word. Whispered only between me and the man who was my mentor, my champion, my surrogate father. The article goes on to describe the concept in breathless detail. Live fire cooking, hyper-local sourcing, a menu based on the rustic traditions of the Slavic heartland, a celebration of fermentation and preservation. It's my menu, it's my philosophy, it's my business plan. It's the ghost of my late grandmother, speaking through recipes I'd spent years painstakingly modernizing. It's my soul, laid out on a platter, and Julien Dubois was presenting it to the world as his own, with a confident, charming smile I knew all too well. 10 minutes earlier, he had fired me. He'd called me into his office, his face a mask of profound disappointment, and accused me of stealing wine from the cellar. It was a lie so absurd, so insulting, it was brilliant. It was a perfect, clean cut. It severed me not just from my job, but from my reputation, my future. He didn't just steal my dream. He salted the earth where it had grown, ensuring nothing could ever take root there again. That was the moment my life split in two, the before and the after. In the alley, under the flickering fluorescent light, I wasn't just a man who had lost his job. I was a man who had been erased. And the worst part, the part that still twists in my gut when the salt air gets cold, is that I had handed him the knife myself, before the erasure. My life was about heat, pressure, and precision. I was Leo Petrenko, the kid from a working-class neighborhood in Scranton, Pennsylvania, who found his religion not in a church, but in his grandmother's kitchen. While other kids were playing baseball, I was watching her hands, nimble and sure, as she rolled out dough for pierogi, the scent of simmering onions and farmer's cheese filling our tiny house. She never used measuring cups. She cooked with her senses, with a knowledge that lived in her bones. It was magic. That magic was my escape from a home life that was loud with arguments and heavy with disappointment. My father was a man whose dreams had been crushed by the coal mines, and he'd grown bitter and hard. Cooking became my language, the only way I could create order and beauty in a world of chaos. I worked 3 jobs through high school to save up for the Culinary Institute of America. The CIA was a revelation. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language. The heat, the pressure, the relentless pursuit of perfection, it felt like coming home. I graduated at the top of my class, my head filled with visions of Michelin stars and critical acclaim. My target was Julien Dubois. He was a legend in Philadelphia, the chef owner of Aurelia, a temple of modern French cuisine, a culinary artist known for his genius and his notoriously demanding kitchen. I staged there for free for 3 months, working harder than I ever had in my life, sweeping 4 hours a night on a friend's couch. I did every menial task with absolute precision, from peeling potatoes to scrubbing the grout between the floor tiles. I was determined to prove I belonged. One night, after a brutal service, Julian found me alone in the kitchen, experimenting with a new way to cure fish. He watched me for a few silent minutes, then tasted the result. He looked me in the eye and said, "You have the hands of a cook, but the heart of a chef. You start on garde manger tomorrow. You're hired." It was the proudest moment of my life. The next 5 years were a blur of fire and steel. The kitchen at Aurelia was a pirate ship, and Julian was our swashbuckling captain. We were a family, forged in the heat of the pass. We worked 16-hour days, drank together after service, and defended each other with fierce loyalty. Julian became the father I never had. He pushed me, challenged me, and celebrated my successes. I rose through the ranks, line cook, sous chef, and finally his chef de cuisine. I was his right-hand man. But as much as I loved French cooking, my own dream was taking shape in a secret notebook I kept at home. I was deconstructing my grandmother's recipes, elevating them with modern techniques. It was a concept for a restaurant I called Hearth. It was everything I believed in. Cooking over a live fire, nose-to-tail butchery, fermentation, and a deep, almost spiritual connection to the ingredients. It was the food of my ancestors, reborn. I told Julian everything. One night, over a bottle of expensive bourbon, I laid it all out for him. The philosophy, the menu, the financial projections. I saw it as a collaboration, a future where we could be partners. He listened intently, his eyes glowing with what I mistook for pride. "Leo," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "this is not just good. This is important. This is your voice. Don't show this to anyone else. We will make this happen when the time is right." I felt seen. I felt validated. I put my dream in his hands for safekeeping and went back to work, more loyal and dedicated than ever. The cracks started to appear subtly. Suppliers started demanding payment up front. The restaurant, once perennially booked, had empty tables on a Tuesday night. Julian grew quiet, stressed. I assumed it was the pressure of maintaining a top-tier restaurant. I worked harder, trying to ease his burden. One afternoon, he called me into his office. The air was thick with tension. He gestured to a printout of the wine inventory. 3 cases of the '09 Bordeaux are missing, Leo. I was confused. "I'll check with the sommelier. It's probably just a clerical error." "There is no error," he said, his voice cold. "I know you've been taking it, selling it to your friends." The accusation was so bizarre I almost laughed. "Julian, what are you talking about? That's insane." "Don't lie to me," he snapped, his face contorting into a mask of righteous anger. "I gave you everything. I treated you like a son, and this is how you repay me? Get your knives. Get out of my restaurant. You're done. In this kitchen and in this city." I stood there, speechless, my mind reeling. It made no sense. This wasn't a conversation. It was an execution. I was marched out of the kitchen, past the stunned faces of my family, none of whom would meet my eye. They had already chosen their side. I packed my knife roll, my hands numb, and walked out into the alley. 10 minutes later, I saw the press release, and everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. The financial trouble, his stress, the absurd, baseless accusation. It was a coup. He needed a new concept to save his failing restaurant, and I had handed him a turnkey solution on a silver platter. The accusation of theft wasn't just to get rid of me. It was to poison the well, to ensure that if I screamed foul, no one would believe the disgraced, thieving chef over the celebrated culinary genius. He hadn't just fired me. He had tried to unwrite my entire existence. The collapse was not swift. It was a slow, grinding descent into a gray, featureless hell. I stayed in Philadelphia, at first out of a stubborn refusal to be exiled. I tried to fight back. I called food writers, colleagues, anyone who would listen. The response was a wall of polite, professional silence. Julian's story had gotten there first. I was radioactive. My dream, Hearth, launched to universal acclaim. I'd walk past the restaurant, its windows glowing with warmth and activity, and see people eating my food, celebrating in the space I had designed in my mind. It was a unique form of psychological torture. The city, which had once felt like a ladder to the stars, was now a cage. Every restaurant I passed was a reminder of what I had lost. Cooking became impossible. I tried once in my small apartment kitchen. I started chopping an onion, and the familiar, sharp scent sent a wave of panic through me so intense I had to sit on the floor, gasping for air. My passion was now inextricably linked to my trauma. My hands, once my greatest asset, felt like foreign objects. I stopped calling my friends. I stopped answering the phone. I started drinking, not for pleasure, but for oblivion. I drank to silence the voice in my head that replayed Julian's betrayal on an endless loop. I lost my apartment and ended up in a grim, weekly rate motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. I was 29 years old, and my life was over. I had become a ghost, haunting the edges of a world I no longer belonged to. My rock bottom wasn't a dramatic event. It was a quiet moment of clarity in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I was looking at my reflection in the smudged mirror of my motel room. I saw a stranger. His eyes were hollow, his face was gaunt, and he looked defeated. The fighter in me, the kid from Scranton who had worked 3 jobs to chase a dream, was gone. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could either let that stranger die in this room, or I could get him the hell out of Philadelphia. I sold my expensive knife roll, the symbol of my former life, for a few $100s. I packed a small bag, walked to the bus station, and bought a ticket for the first bus heading north. I didn't care where it was going. I just needed to go. The destination on the ticket read Portland, Maine. Maine was a shock. The air itself felt different, clean, sharp, and cold. It scoured the smog of Philadelphia from my lungs. I got off the bus with $70 in my pocket and no plan. I found a shelter for the first few nights, and then, through a day labor agency, I got a job, not in a kitchen, on a lobster boat out of a small, working harbor town south of Portland. The work was brutal. My alarm went off at 3:30 a.m. We'd be on the water before sunrise, hauling heavy traps in the biting wind. My hands raw and numb from the cold salt water. It was mindless, back-breaking labor, and it was exactly what I needed. At the end of the day, I was too physically exhausted to think, to remember, to feel. The ocean was so vast and so indifferent, it put my own pain into perspective. My problems, which had seemed like the center of the universe in Philly, felt small against the immense gray power of the Atlantic. I saved up enough money to rent a small room in a shared house. For the first time in over a year, I started to sleep through the night. The nightmares began to fade, replaced by a dreamless, restful blackness. I started walking the coastline. I watched the tides come and go, a rhythm of loss and return that felt deeply comforting. I saw the fishermen bringing in their daily catch, gleaning mackerel, heavy cod, buckets of briny oysters. The ingredients were so fresh, so perfect, they seemed to vibrate with life. There was no pretense here. No fancy sauces, no elaborate plating, just the simple, honest truth of a fish pulled from the cold, clean water. One day, the owner of a local fish shack, a gruff old man named Sal, saw me watching his oyster shucker work. "You know how to do that, city boy?" he grunted. "I do," I said. "Prove it," he said, handing me an oyster knife. My hand closed around the familiar handle. I hadn't held a knife for a real purpose in almost 2 years. I hesitated, then placed the tip of the knife at the hinge of the oyster. With a practiced twist of the wrist, the shell popped open, revealing the plump, glistening meat inside. not a drop of its precious liquor spilled. I did another, and another. A dozen perfect oysters in under a minute. Sal just nodded. The kid I got is leaving for college next week. The job's yours if you want it. So I became an oyster shucker. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't a career, but it was a beginning. I stood for hours at a wooden stand, the sea breeze on my face, shucking oysters for tourists and locals. And as I worked, something began to shift inside me. I was connecting with food again, but in a new way. It wasn't about ego or ambition. It was about a simple, tactile task. It was about providing a moment of simple pleasure. I started cooking again, just for myself. I'd buy a piece of fresh haddock from the docks and pan-sear it with nothing but salt, pepper, and a knob of butter. I'd eat it standing in my kitchen, and it tasted better than anything I had ever made at Aurelia. I was rediscovering the soul of the ingredient. My reinvention began with a single pot of chowder. I made it for my housemates one cold, rainy night, using fresh clams, good potatoes, and thick cream. It was simple, unpretentious, and deeply comforting. Seeing the look of pure, unadulterated pleasure on their faces sparked something in me I thought was long dead. It was the joy of feeding people, the core reason I had started cooking in the first place. I started a small, weekend pop-up at the local farmers market. I had one table, one induction burner, and one pot. I called it simple. I made one thing each week: fish chowder, lobster rolls on perfectly toasted buns, crab cakes with no filler. Whatever was freshest that day. There was no menu, no pretense. People loved it. They'd line up, drawn by the smell and the simplicity. I wasn't Chef Leo Petrenko. I was just Leo, the guy who made the good chowder. And for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Years passed. Simple grew from a market stall to a small, beloved food truck that I parked by the harbor. I built a life. I had friends, real friends, not the transactional allies of the restaurant world. I had a community. I even started teaching a basic cooking class at the local community center. I was happy. It was a quiet, steady happiness, not the manic, high-wire act of my old life. One night, after a long day of service, I was scrolling through the news on my phone. An article from a Philadelphia food journal caught my eye. The headline read, "Hearth's flame extinguished. Julien Dubois' celebrated restaurant closes permanently." My breath caught in my throat. I read the article, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm. It detailed the restaurant's initial meteoric rise, followed by a slow decline. Critics who had once praised it began to describe the food as technical but soulless. Key staff left. The restaurant, built on my dream, had failed because it lacked the one ingredient Julien couldn't steal: my heart. He had the blueprint, but he didn't have the soul. The article mentioned he was facing bankruptcy and had disappeared from the public eye. I leaned back in my chair, the phone heavy in my hand. I waited for the feeling I had fantasized about for years, the triumphant surge of vindication, of schadenfreude. I wanted to feel joy at his downfall, but it didn't come. Instead, all I felt was a profound, quiet sadness, a sense of tragic waste. He had been a great chef. He had been my mentor. In his greed and desperation, he had not only destroyed my life, but he had also destroyed his own. The anger that had fueled me for so long had finally completely burned itself out. And in its place, there was just peace, a quiet, empty space ready to be filled with something new. He was no longer the monster in my story. He was just a sad, flawed man who had made a terrible choice. His story and mine, once so violently entangled, were finally separate. He could have his ghosts. I was free of mine. My life now is measured in the changing of the tides. The food truck is still going strong, but my real passion is the supper club I host twice a month in a converted boat shed overlooking the water. It's called Hearth. I took the name back, not for revenge, but for reclamation. It means something different to me now. It's not about a big city restaurant or critical acclaim. It's about community. It's about a long wooden table filled with my neighbors. It's about the warmth of a fire, the sound of laughter, and the sharing of simple, honest food. Tonight, the shed is filled with light and conversation. I'm plating the main course. Those perfect, pan-seared scallops served with a simple brown butter sauce and wilted sea greens I foraged this morning. It's a dish of 3 ingredients. It's a dish that speaks of this place, this water, this moment. I bring the plates out myself. I see the faces of my friends, my community, light up. This is my victory. It's not the roar of a packed dining room. It's the quiet murmur of happy, well-fed people. It's not a Michelin star. It's the feeling of belonging. The betrayal didn't break me. It burned me down to the foundations. But it forced me to build something new, something stronger, something real. I lost a career, and in its place, I found a calling. I lost a father and learned how to be my own man. I lost a dream that was tied to ego and ambition, and I found a reality rooted in connection and peace. I look down at my hands. They are scarred from knives, burns, and lobster claws. They are not the hands of a celebrated young prodigy anymore. They are the hands of a man who knows the value of a simple, perfect ingredient. They are the hands of a man who learned to cook again, not for fame, but for love. They are steady, they are capable, they are mine, and they are finally at peace.